thing is ready. The signs in place. Now, Ralph and I have been communicating at midnight, so you probably thought I was still awake, but I needed a proper night's sleep to come here, so I'm leaving them to put the sign in place. But what I thought of was that I'm pretty sure that Vigo probably left here around 11 o'clock the Friday evening, 208 years ago. He didn't WhatsApp anybody, but he probably passed a few people and said, the building is ready for school tomorrow. Think so? He got that message right. About halfway on their journey from English Harbor to Lyons Estate, there is a delightful spot, a gentle rising ground, covered with the smooth green grass, and here and there a forest of trees, open to the sweet and gentle breezes from Willoughby Bay. This was written in a book in 1856 by one John Horsford. The book is called A Voice from the West Indies. He doesn't just record that, but he records the name Vigo Blake, the head man on Blake's estate, seeing the want of such a central rendezvous, told Mr. and Mrs. Thwaites that if they could obtain leave from the proprietor, he and his fellow slaves would build a schoolroom on the very spot desired. And the rest is history. We know they did. So, like Ralph, I want to take you basically on a story, on a journey. And on this journey, we will meet a few people. And I want us to think about these people and think of the time they were in. And so, the story we're told is that many enslaved people were being taught at that point in time. In fact, I want to start our story in 1812, when Charles and his wife, Elizabeth, I'm guilty of usually saying Elizabeth Hart and her husband, Charles, because the Hart sisters are central to this whole thing, and they were black Antiguan women, free women at that time. So that couple would often go between English Harbor and Lyons Estate. You know where Lyons Estate is? Just up from Newfield? Yeah. Good. So they would make that journey to celebrate service on that estate. And we're told that one Sunday, when the service ended, which means all the people from the plantation had ended their service, Mr. Thwaites was still hearing singing. Now, the singing should be coming from them, but there was still some people, children's voices, singing. And so he went to investigate. And he found what another writer describes as an old black man named Harry. This gentleman calls him Henry, but we know that's one and the same thing, right? So they found old Harry. And Harry was teaching catechism to a group of enslaved children. No, Charles was kind of like, what's going on? Because as far as they understood, they, the good Methodists, and some Anglicans and Moravians, were the ones teaching. Who is this, by description, old black man who was teaching? But what's going on here? And so they came to understand that the enslaved people of Antigua were already educating each other. I want us to understand that. We were already taking control of our lives 20 plus years before somebody said we are emancipating you. Alright? So, having happened upon Harry's little classroom, they recognized, well, is this happening elsewhere? And he said to Henry, tell you what, in a couple of weeks when we come back, I want you to gather all the people who are teaching like this and their children. Bring them together and let's see what we can do. No, I wasn't there, but I have a feeling that Charles Thwaites expected a few dozen children, maybe 100. More than 400 enslaved children and adults turned up and said, we from this area, not the whole of Antigua, we from this area are busy being educated. Some of them were being educated by people who couldn't read and write themselves. Okay? So whatever they knew, they taught. They were learning poetry, they were learning songs, and some were learning to read and write, usually from the Bible. So we recognize that. We recognize then that although Charles and Elizabeth, as well as Elizabeth's sister Anne, were busy teaching in Sunday school normally, they knew now that there were more people out there who wanted an education. And the question was, how can we do this? Because we don't have a place. We can't move them from that estate and bring them over here. It won't be allowed. And so we can only imagine, because a lot of this we have to imagine, we can only imagine that at some point along the way they encountered Vigo. And I like to call him Vigo. Because Vigo, I want to assume, was his own name. Blake was attached to him because he was attached to Blake's estate. So they would have encountered Vigo. Vigo knew them. And as they did their little procession regularly from Lyons Estate to English Harbor, Vigo would have seen them. And at some point, Vigo said, because there would have been discussions going on, he said, look, if you can ask the people who own that piece of land, talk to them. If they will let you have the land, I can get the label. And we can build it. And we're told that one permission was granted. The enslaved people, as well as some free black people, as well as others, came into this general area and they cut down trees and they made lawns and they made wood and they constructed something that was approximately 44 by 16 feet. Look at this building we're in right now. 16 feet does not fully take in perhaps from the door to just beyond where Petra is or where I'm standing. So it was that wide. I kind of did a rough count off, and this is a little bit more than 20 feet going across. So twice the distance. No? My calculator's going to be wrong. But think of something that's not quite twice the size of where we are sitting right now. And that's what they built. Like, they didn't go out to Jews or Brysons or somebody and buy some wood. They had to find the wood and other material, and they constructed this thing. Working every night, probably till 11 o'clock at night, and then going home, and there was no ride in the truck to get home. They were walking back home. I want us to understand the value of what was done here. And then to wake up the next morning and go to work, do what they were told to do, and then do it all over again for 6 weeks. The roof we're told was made of thatch. Do you understand what that is? Mm-hmm. The sugarcane. So that was just to keep out as much water as possible. But we also know that would have kept out everything. Under your feet right now, there are tiles. Under their feet was the earth. Charles and Elizabeth often didn't make it home at night, so they actually had a mattress that was curled up under a sink, and so sometimes they slept there. The only problem was that to start their day, they then had to remove the jiggers. You know those are? Okay. Not personally, thank God.
Explain.
But they would have had to remove them not only from their feet, but from their bodies. Again, I want us to understand the sacrifices made to ensure that every night, every day, more than 300 to 400 enslaved people, freed people, and impoverished white people were allowed or able to attend school. And how did the school work? We're told that during the day, the people who had been discarded from the plantation, those who were maimed, there was apparently a lady who was blind, but many of the people who were no longer of any great importance, who had very simple jobs perhaps and were allowed to do their thing, waiting till their dying day, they were brought here during the day, and they were taught. Because guess what? Whatever they learned during the day, when everybody else was working, they came back at night and they taught. This is our history. This is how we became who we are. This is why Antigua was considered one of the better educated colonies at the point of emancipation. And no, that's not why they set us quote unquote free in 1834. That was all about money. But that's another lecture, another discussion. So we recognize what went on at that point in time. I want us to speak a little bit about the people. I want us to understand who the Harts were. Just again, so we can put it in context. But a man named Barry Hart, he owned an estate called Pope's Estate. He also, Barry Hart was a black man. He was described in one of these books. There are lovely books online that you can read. He was described, interestingly enough, as a free black man. So I'm trying to understand if he had been freed or if he was born free. But the fact that he was referred to as a free black man sort of suggests that he attained his freedom. His wife, however, whose name was also Anne, there are plenty of Annes in the story, by the way. his first wife, Anne, not to be confused with his second wife, Anne, his first wife, Anne, was described as a lady from a distinguished colored family in St. Kitts. Alright? He was a free black man. She was from a distinguished colored family in St. Kitts, the Clarkley family, who also had Antiguan roots. But again, just so we understand the difference in language and who they were. But they got married and they lived here, and they had a few children. The most noted ones were Anne and Elizabeth.
And again?
Anne and Elizabeth attained an education as would have happened on estates back then, because people were brought in to educate them. Alright? The Anglican Church may not have been as welcoming of the colored population at that point in time. So we're told in their early years, Anne and Elizabeth gravitated towards the Moravians. So any Moravians in the group here, you all almost got them. But then the Gilberts turned up. Well, Mr. Cope, you may have known the Methodist story, but they met these people who came in the early days, and they believed. And they believed in what the Methodists were saying. And so, first Elizabeth, the younger one, at 14, she accepted what was being taught. And then later, her older sister, 4 years older than her, Anne, they became Methodists, devout Methodists. Here are some little interesting parts. Again, we want to know who they are. The thing is that these two free colored ladies were about their business. One of Nathaniel Gilbert's nephews. Now, Mr. Hart trusted these people to come into his house, to work with his children, and the man decided he wanted to marry the man's daughter. Can you imagine those days when Mr. Hart's quite comfortable in his estate, right? He's kind of worked out in his mind how we treat the enslaved people a little bit better than everybody else, so he's kind of worked out his conscience. But life is okay, we don't want to rock the boat. But they come to upset things by saying they want to marry one of his daughters. Anyway, Mr. Gilbert, Nathaniel Gilbert, preacher, everybody, every ship's captain in the dockyard and said, do not perform that ceremony. It is not to happen. It is illegal. I don't say this to malign the man who the love good, but just so we understand how things work. And also so we can understand the Hart sisters and what they were doing, that they were daring to step outside of the norm. Historians argue about whether or not they were abolitionists or not. I don't care, they were doing good, and what they did helped to produce something else. And so, one sister married this guy. They had to leave the country, they came back and they were married. And then, this missionary named Thwaites turns up in Antigua. Again, Mr. Hart Foley welcome into his house, and history repeats itself. He got a job, because missionaries don't make plenty money. I don't think that, I don't know what they do. Got a job in the dock as a clerk, and continued his work, establishing Sunday schools, establishing schoolrooms, various things, with his wife, who was known for her pony, going around the estates in this general area, carrying food, carrying clothing, carrying hope with her. Right? These are the people we're talking about. And then enters Vigo. Who was Vigo? We hear about somebody else almost 100 years before who was referred to as the head slave for his person who said they owned him. So we know that head slaves were usually people of high intellect. They were trusted. Some head slaves were even overseers, allowed into the fields to carry out the work that quite often was done by white men. They were trusted. And having been involved with these Thwaites people, these Gilberts, he said, but the piece of land up here is just sitting there. We've heard that in Antigua as well, but different. It's just sitting there. Can't they have it? Can't they use it? And then he moved forward. He was a man of action. Unfortunately, although we know much about Elizabeth and Anne and Charles and Gilbert, we don't know very much about Vigo. Vigo's claim to fame was daring to believe that a school could be built and that he could take responsibility for building it. We don't really know if he had children, a wife. We don't know his dreams other than education. But we know that he was responsible and he accepted that responsibility. And so as I close off this morning, I hope that what you have gained here is a little bit of knowledge about this area in terms of that particular point in time, because I'm not in a position to teach you about Bethesda the place, just Bethesda the school. We know that 1813, today, 28 years ago, there were some children and adults learning in a place built specially for them. And that's the important thing. Children and adults, enslaved people were already learning, but they were not learning in a place that was built for them to learn. And that's what was different about Bethesda. It was named Bethesda not on this Saturday, 28 years ago. It was just a schoolroom. But later on, an event happened. I won't get into detail about it, but it reminded Elizabeth of the story in the Bible concerning Bethesda and the healing powers of the water below. And that was when she decided this would become the holy place. Even though in her diary, she said it was a holy or a hallowed, merciful place for everybody except her and her husband, due to the jiggers. That's where the jiggers came into the story. She said it was not a great place for them because of that. So we understand that this place meant a lot to many. We understand that it started a process. We also know that the building established here in 1813 did not last forever. That in actual fact, at some point, the school was actually transferred to Hope's estate, not Bethesda School, but Hope's estate, which was eventually part of Montpelier estate. But some people apparently decided to stay here anyway, even though the building was in a bad state. When we think history, please don't think it is a stagnant situation. 208 years is a long time. Think of all that happens to a typical building in the space of 10 years. You build your home and 10 years later, crap turned up and that, much as something which wasn't built in a sturdy manner. And so they would have rebuilt, they would have moved, they would have come back. But we know that somewhere on this hill, it started here, and over time it's continued here. Even though it's eventually moved to another hill. But the Methodists would have continued here, teaching in another form, whether it be religious or otherwise. And so we celebrate this place. We celebrate Bethesda. We remember those who came a long time ago. We remember those who are here now. And we encourage everybody involved to learn more about the story. To learn more about the story of Antigua and Barbuda. Because the books are there. It's for us to go looking. Mm-hmm. And yes, as I read this book, part of it, I got annoyed sometimes with Mr. Hall reading Horsford. Because he spoke about, for example, a very intelligent young boy. And he was just a field hand, a very dark boy. His level of intelligence was just incomprehensible. And I thought, really, Mr. Horsford? But we have to read it still, because from that we learn so much. And Mr. Moss was one of the good ones. Okay, just so you understand that. He's one of the good ones. So thank you so much for listening. I hope we are motivated to learn more.